at the forefront of politics.
Our enemy is Trump. He is the enemy. We gotta unite. If we're not a united party, we lose to Trump.
On the front lines of activism.
There's certain fights, if we don't engage, they win. This is a fundamental question of who we are.
And delivering your daily dose of comedy.
Donald Trump, when he had his physical, he had his blood pressure, and mine is higher than his.
Oh.
And the irony is mine is higher because of him.
From the blue wave.
We flipped. Enough seats to take control of the House. We control the House.
To 2020 and beyond. This is the Dean Obeidallah Show on Sirius XM Progress, Channel 127.
And welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live right here Monday, August 19th. Brothers and sisters, I hope you had a good weekend. Magic number is now 442. I know it seems a long way away, 442. That's how many days until November 3rd, 2020. The most important election of our lives. You know what's actually pretty good? That Trump never changes. Every day he reminds us of why we have to come out and vote, why we have to get our friends, family, people have to not only get out and vote, make phone calls, run for office, raise money for your friends, whatever you have to do because of how horrible he is. But today I want to spend a lot of time talking about the big developments with Eric Garner. Being from New York here, it was a case that the whole nation saw, but we saw specifically here in New York, right in front of us. And we have some great guests coming on to talk about it later in the show, including Mayor de Blasio is going to join us and others. But it's been since 2014, and I want to remind people of the whole story of Eric Garner, how he got to today where the police officer who put him in the illegal chokehold was fired, who's still going to sue civilly to keep his job, but he's at least formally fired right now. But I think the details are important because it has been so many years. And when you realize what happened and the injustice involved in this, it makes you question the system and the fairness. Because we watch an unarmed black man die in front of our eyes, pleading for a breath, and no one was charged criminally. The worst that happened is 5 years later, and 5 years and a month later, the cop is fired, and he still has a civil recourse to maybe get his job back. So let's take it from the beginning. It all began July 17, 2014, 5 years and a month and a few days ago. Around 3:30 p.m., broad daylight in Staten Island, 43-year-old Eric Garner, a father of six, was there outside of a convenience store selling cigarettes, loose cigarettes, as they call it, which means it is a violation of the law. It's like a misdemeanor, but taking cigarettes out of the pack and selling it and trying to make a little bit of money. To tell you a little bit about Staten Island, so it gives you some context, because it's one of the 5 boroughs in New York, but it's unlike any other borough. It is the only borough in New York that voted for Donald Trump in 2016. 57% to Trump, 40% to Hillary. Every other borough overwhelmingly went to Hillary Clinton and against Donald Trump. So that tells you a little bit about it. It's also the most white district, the most white borough we have in. So someone called the police, some local store, saying there's a guy selling cigarettes outside of my store. Please show up first in not in uniform, undercover, and then in uniform as well. And there was Mr. Garner. And he, as you can tell when I play some of the audio, had dealt with these police officers, these very ones before, who had harassed him. And again, this is a misdemeanor. He's an unarmed black man. There's no dispute whatsoever. Just an unarmed guy. Could have been anyone. Just selling cigarettes, trying to make a little money for his family of 6. And I'll play the audio. Obviously, you can't see it. I'll just explain slightly to give you context of what's going on. What you're going to hear are the police going up to Mr. Garner, and Mr. Garner is saying, come on, guys, give me a break. Stop bothering me all the time. He's not yelling. He's just saying it to them. And then there's a scuffle. In that scuffle, they grab him, and then Officer Daniel Pantaleo puts him in a chokehold. First, he sort of just grabs him, then puts him in a chokehold, which is a dangerous maneuver, which has been banned. It is absolutely banned by the NYPD for 20 years. For over 20 years, because it is that dangerous. It is potentially lethal at any moment. You can crush someone's windpipe. You're getting behind them. A chokehold, as you might imagine, is putting your arm around someone and compressing their vocal cords. You can crush their vocal cords. You can crush their throat and kill them. So I'm going to play the clip now, and you're going to hear Mr. Garner at the end say, can't breathe, over and over and over again. Let's play clip number 1.
I did not sell nothing. Because every time you see me, you want to harass me, you want to stop me, try to sell cigarettes. I'm minding my business, officer. I'm minding my business. Please just leave me alone. I told you the last time, please just leave me alone. Don't touch me.
Came over.
Don't touch me. Damn, man.
All right, stop. Give your hand, buddy.
Put your hand behind your back. I can't breathe. 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 I can't breathe.
Mr. Garner said, "I can't breathe" 11 times, we saw on that tape, because it went on from there. 11 times, Mr. Garner was held in illegal chokehold, crying out simply to breathe, and the police stayed on top of him. And the city's medical examiner, after doing an investigation, concluded Mr. Garner's death was a homicide, which means an unlawful killing. And their exact words were, Mr. Garner suffered an asthma attack and went to cardiac arrest while he was being restrained. The city's medical examiner said they ruled it a homicide because a chokehold was a, quote, significant initial factor. So you have an armed man, 3:30 in the afternoon, broad daylight, not under the influence of any kind of drugs or alcohol, nothing, crying out, "I can't breathe" 11 times. The medical examiner says it was a homicide, so you would think, of course, in our system of justice, that the officer, Daniel Pantaleo, would have been charged with a crime. That's how it works, right? You have a man killed. We all watch him killed grotesquely in front of us. He's not. The grand jury in Donald Trumpville, Staten Island, does not indict him. That's December 2014. At the time, President Obama said, when anybody in this country is not being treated equally under the law, that is a problem, and it's my job as president to help solve it. His Department of Justice then initiated an investigation to see if there was a civil rights violation of Mr. Garner. Just so it's clear, a civil rights violation can carry a criminal penalty with it, and it involves if an action is taken under a color of law, meaning you're a police officer, you work for the government in some level, and you deprive someone of their civil rights. Killing them is the ultimate deprivation of civil rights, as you might imagine. It is challenging, to be blunt, from a legal point of view, to get convictions for civil rights violations against police officers. The last time a police officer was convicted for a civil rights violation was an incident that happened right here in New York. We have to go back to 1998. In that case, Francis Lavoti was a cop who put another man, Anthony Baez, into a chokehold. Just like this case, put him in a chokehold and then lied to cover it up. He was convicted of a civil rights violation and got 7.5 years in prison. Well, in the case, though, of Eric Garner and the police officer, the case languished in the Department of Justice. During the closing part of the Obama administration, they investigated, and they, at that point, by the time it was over, did not find they could move forward yet, but they were still investigating. Trump administration takes over, and on July 17th, just last month, a day before the statute of limitations was going to run, it's a 5-year statute of limitations, Bill Barr reportedly made the decision himself to say they will not bring a civil rights violation charges against the officer. During a news conference, the U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of New York, Richard Donoghue, explained there was simply not enough evidence to charge Pantaleo with civil rights violations beyond a reasonable doubt. At that time, Reverend Al Sharpton, who's been one of the leading advocates in helping the Garner family, said 5 years ago, Eric Garner was choked to death. Today, the federal government choked Lady Justice, and that is why we are outraged. At the time, Eric Holder, who was Obama's former AG, said that the evidence strongly suggested the federal government should bring charges against the officer, even though he added it was notoriously hard to prosecute officers for deaths in custody, which is the stark reality, but you could still charge someone in these kind of egregious circumstances. So you had this decision in July, but all this time, the Garner family is looking for justice. There are 6 children without a father. There's a wife without a husband. Looking for justice for 5 years, looking for something. Because the man who killed her father on a video walked the streets and still was employed by the city of New York wearing a badge, having a gun, being paid with our tax dollars. Nothing had changed. Guy is living his life. August 2nd, just a few weeks ago, a police administrative judge, Rosemary Maldonado, had a hearing, looked at all the evidence in the totality, and recommended the officer who used a chokehold should be fired, saying Officer Pantaleo's use of a chokehold fell so short of objective reasonableness that the tribunal found it to be reckless, a gross deviation from the standard of conduct established for a New York City police officer. She also said that he was dishonest in the hearings and that it was implausible and self-serving, and that she didn't go as far to say he lied, but she said he was dishonest. She recommended he be fired. Now, just so it's clear, in New York, under New York law, the commissioner of the police, in this case James O'Neill, makes that decision, not the mayor. Doesn't mean the mayor can't have influence in it, but Mayor de Blasio has publicly said, and he'll be on later, that he waited and didn't try to push for the termination because the Department of Justice, first under Obama and then under Trump, had asked them to defer and wait for the DOJ because maybe they were going to charge him with civil rights violations. Then it would take on his own criminal matter. He would be suspended and convicted, then fired. Well, today, Commissioner O'Neill made a statement based on that finding. And I'll play what Commissioner James O'Neill said today on what they're going to do with the officer. Here's clip number 2, please.
As Mr. Garner balanced himself on the sidewalk on his hands and knees, Deputy Commissioner of Trials Rosemarie Maldonado found that Officer Pantaleo consciously disregarded the substantial and unjustifiable risk of maneuver explicitly prohibited by the department. She found that during the struggle, Officer Pantaleo had the opportunity to readjust his grip from a prohibited chokehold to a less lethal alternative, but did not make use of that opportunity. Instead, even once Mr. Garner was moved to his side on the ground with his left arm behind his back and his right hand still open and extended, Officer Pantaleo kept his hands clasped and maintained the chokehold. Mr. Garner's obvious distress is confirmed when he coughs and grimaces. Moreover, Trials Commissioner Maldonado found that Officer Pantaleo's conduct caused physical injury that meets the penal law threshold and that his recklessness caused multi-layered internal bruising and hemorrhaging that impaired Mr. Garner's physical condition and caused substantial pain and was a significant factor in triggering an asthma attack. For all of these reasons, taken together, even after reviewing Officer Pantaleo's commendable service record of nearly 300 arrests and 14 department medals earned leading up to that day, Trial Commissioner Maldonado recommended that he be dismissed from the department.
And that's what he did. He dismissed him from the department today. He was fired today. I want to play some other reactions. I think it's very important. One is Reverend Al Sharpton, who has been a champion with the family the whole time. He stood with the family there at a press conference at National Action Network. And here's what he said about the firing. Here's clip number 3, please.
As I said, we are relieved but not celebratory. And we are challenging this city to now move to the next step of making chokeholds illegal and to not castigate and disparage the name of Garner on unproven allegations. If everything they charged and everything they accused and everything they alleged on Eric Garner were true, it still does not justify Daniel Pantaleo to put a chokehold on him and cause his death. And for the officers to put false information on their reports and the others that came and did not do what could have been done to save his life. So let us know that this is not the end, it is the beginning of the next phase of continuing to fight for justice.
And I want to play Eric Garner's daughter, Emerald, who was there sitting next to Reverend Al. And I know the audio's a little tinny. It's the way that it was broadcast on TV, the same way. But here's Emerald talking about her reaction first to the commissioner firing the police officer 5 years later. Here's clip number 5.
Today we got the decision, and as Reverend Sharpton said, the commissioner has decided to fire the officer. I thank Reverend Sharpton for standing with us for the past 5 years. I don't believe that if Reverend Sharpton hasn't been standing with us, we wouldn't have been able to get this far. I thank everybody who's been standing with my family for the past 5 years. And I thank everyone who has been out on the front line, everyone who's been screaming fire Pantaleo, because now he's fired. And for, Commissioner O'Neill, I thank you for doing the right thing. I truly, sincerely thank you for firing the officer. Regardless to however you came up to your decision, you finally made a decision that should have been made 5 years ago.
And then she talks about the future, looking forward. What does she want next? What does everyone want next? Because it cannot be business as usual. And things have changed. When the mayor comes on, Mayor de Blasio, in the second hour, at the latter part of the hour, we'll talk about how things have changed in the last 5 years under his leadership for the better. But here is Emerald Gardner on what she wants to see next. Here's clip number 6.
We can't talk about what happened in the past. We can only talk about what we're going to do moving forward. We will be going for the congressional hearings. We will be trying to reopen the case. We will be going after the rest of the officers involved because it's not over. Justice for New York City means Pantaleo is fired and there's no murdering cop on the police force. So, Commissioner O'Neill, while we appreciate you making your decision, we are definitely still calling for the Eric Garner law, which will ban the chokehold, which will ban officers being protected by a shield and not held accountable for their actions. Eric Garner was killed 5 years ago. It took 5 years for the officer to be fired. I don't want another Eric Garner. I will do everything in my power to never see another Eric Garner. I don't even want to see another video of a person being choked out because it wasn't supposed to happen to him and it's not supposed to happen. I should not be here standing with my brother fatherless. I should be here with my father. But Pantaleo took that away from me on 7/17. So, yes, he's fired, but the fight is not over. We will continue to fight.
I can't even imagine the heartbreak of a video of watching your own father be killed. What she has seen, what her brother has seen, what her family has seen. And, 5 years later, clearly she's processed to the point where she's bringing it forward and saying, look, I want to make sure that no other family suffers what I did, which is remarkable. It is courage and laser-like focus in making things better for the next family out there. So there's not another Eric Garner family out there. But still, when I think about it for a second, the idea of watching your father unarmed, 3:30 in the afternoon on a summer day, selling loose cigarettes, and the police choke him, and he's yelling, I can't breathe 11 times. And they don't get up, and they don't stop, and he dies. And the police force was there, and they didn't resuscitate him. They didn't do what they had to do, and he died. And of course, there's always a counter reaction, and the Trumpian reaction, of course, was from Patrick Lynch. If you don't know him, he's the head of the PBA, the union here in New York, and will never criticize a police officer for anything at all. And you wonder why, when there's a trust issue in New York with various communities and the police, when you have a PBA head like Patrick Lynch, who for years has done the same exact thing, even when the police in like this case are so grotesquely wrong, this cop. He violated 20-year-old policy. He lied during the tribunal of the hearing, according to the judge. And still, today, he said O'Neill, the commissioner, has bowed to anti-police extremists. He said O'Neill will wake up tomorrow to discover that the cop haters are still not satisfied, but will be too late, which is so Trumpian, cop haters. But here's a little, so you can hear Patrick Lynch foaming at the mouth today. Here he is, clip number 7.
Number 1, we are asking for a no confidence vote in the mayor and the police commissioner of the city of New York. It's absolutely essential that the world know that the New York City Police Department is rudderless and frozen. The leadership has abandoned ship and left our police officers on the street alone, without backing.
That is Trumpian. That is Trumpian insanity and gaslighting. The man, we saw the officer Pantaleo put a man in a chokehold, an unarmed black man, 3:30 in the afternoon, put him in a chokehold, which violated policies. The man pleaded just for a breath of air, and he did not do anything. No sympathy, no compassion, nothing. They stood on him. And today the guy is simply fired, not even charged with a crime. He should have been indicted, but it was Staten Island, which is Trumpville, so he wasn't indicted. And speaking of Trump, Trump tweets about everything. Guess how many tweets today about this? 0. Because Donald Trump will never stand with a black man against a white police officer. That's never going to happen. You're never going to see Donald Trump go, finally, justice is a little served for the Garner family with the firing of this cop. Never going to happen. Black lives don't matter to Donald Trump. Brown lives don't matter. Muslim lives especially, we don't matter to Donald Trump. None of us matter. So when you have a white cop versus an unarmed black man, Donald Trump's going to pick the white cop every time, even though we watched him kill him on camera. There's no disputing it. We all saw it with our own eyes. Trump will tell you something different. Well, that black man did this or that. So I ask you, before we have our guest on, we have Michael Hardy at the top of the hour for a little bit. He's one of the co-founders of the National Action Network with Reverend Al Sharpton. He's general counsel, really nice guy. Been on MSNBC with him. Look forward to chat with him. And then near the end of the hour, for a little bit, Mayor de Blasio will join us. In between, a lot of time for phone calls. But especially if you're black, and you see this. You see a black man killed right before your eyes in the middle of the day by cops. And no one is criminally charged. How can you believe Black Lives Matter? How could you believe that it's any different than the time of Jim Crow, except the guy's getting fired? But in that time, no one got fired. I guess they just moved up in the police force when they killed black men. How do any of us have confidence? Any minority community? The cops in New York used to be horrible to the Muslims before de Blasio. Under Bloomberg, they did unbelievable surveillance. They didn't kill us. That's very true. But they did surveillance. They violated our constitutional rights. They did surveillance of everything, our places of worship, our schools, where we went to eat. So you had that. We didn't get stop and frisk. We had that. Black and brown communities under Bloomberg had stop and frisk. Thankfully, de Blasio's ended both of those things. But when you hear about this, if you're black, does this move you at all? Or is this life that you've seen for decade after decade after decade? And if it is, what's going to change it? What will it take for us as a nation to say this is absolutely un-American? It is vile. It is despicable. It's something that our candidates in 2020 need to talk about. How to address, and there are some people. Julian Castro has a detailed policy on not just criminal justice, on policing. We talked about it like 2 months ago when it first came out. Many candidates have policies on criminal justice, which touch on police. Julian Castro just on policing. Maybe that's part of the conversation, but I want to hear from you. I'd love to hear your views on this. 866-997-4748. Is this justice for the Garner family? I don't think it is. It can't be. Let's take a break. I want to hear from you. You're listening to the Dean Obeidallah Show, where we crush Trump's lies every single day
on Sirius